Hey guys, this is Chris from Deus Ex Machina. This is going to be a strange one because I wanted to focus partially on something else. I have done a few videos regarding some films and television shows and other titles. I did a video, one of my, oddly enough, highest view counts was for a commentary about my dislike for Alien Covenant. I did so from a personal context because a lot of you guys who have been following me for a very long time know perfectly well that I developed an Alien Fusion game back in the 90s, and so I had a very personal connection to that franchise. And the same thing with Ghost in the Shell, because I also did a Ghost in the Shell video regarding that movie. And just disclaimer, as you guys know, I did enjoy it. I do enjoy it. As time has gone on, I've started to it started to wear a bit, and that has been accentuated somewhat with the release of Alita, and that's what this video is going to be about, talking about my thoughts on the new feature film. This video will be initially a review of the movie. We will then spiral into an analysis of the movie, which will eventually go into the back end, the reviews and the analysis from other people that have popped up. So first of all, to the movie itself, I love Alita. I absolutely adore this film. I think it's absolutely fantastic. This right here, as we'll squiggle out of the way here, is the original OVA, which you can find in its entirety online. I suggest you go and see it. There's also the original manga that the OVA is based on. One of the things I wanted to state is how incredibly faithful this movie is. As people have said, it is the most faithful anime adaptation we have ever seen. What you're seeing is footage from the OVA, and I'm telling you now, there's sequences from this introduction that are almost taken point by point right from this OVA. I'm not kidding. And this is something we've known because Robert Rodriguez also did Sin City, and that was, he took the manga, like this scene right here. This scene is directly in the new movie. Like the whole skull taking the eyeball out, that is right from the OVA. It's in the beginning of Alita. This is not a spoiler because it is quite literally the first 30 seconds. So yeah, visually, aesthetically, everything is incredibly faithful. The storyline is incredibly faithful. More, I think, than we probably could have wanted. And this is my point going back to Ghost in the Shell, because I felt that we are kind of building on steps. We needed to have very disappointing anime adaptations with Dragon Ball Evolution, and we got to Ghost in the Shell, which I think was directed by somebody who wanted it to be faithful, but was written by somebody who wanted to make their own stamp, and they made some critical errors, both in the production and in the writing. I think the writing actually fails Ghost in the Shell more than some of the missteps regarding the script, or regarding the whole whitewashing fiasco. So Alita is amazing, and this is one of the things I'll come out and say right now. Like the other reviews I've done, this is entirely opinionated. I've taken critical analysis, I've taken film studies, and when it comes to titles like Alita, that's thrown out the window. It's when I saw Pacific Rim. It's like, ooh, giant robots. There's nothing I can do that'll counter that nostalgia. I'm a victim of nostalgia. Now, what was interesting is I didn't watch the anime before I saw the film. I only pulled off the pure memory from the original viewings back in the 90s, where I binged it quite heavily. The OVA does jump because it's only 55 minutes, and the film takes that 55-minute OVA and pulls it into over 2 hours, adding in more plot and elements from the original manga to fill it up. That's basically what it is. People say it's a faithful representation of the original manga, the first 2 volumes, and then an additional elements from the 4th and 5th. I don't think that's 100% true. I think actually what they did is they adapted the OVA and brought in elements from the manga to fill it up. That's why they brought in Motorball and so forth. And this is true because, once again, we're seeing exact scenes from the OVA translated into the film that may not have been in the original manga. More so, some of character elements were also brought in from the OVA, like the character of Chiron in the film and in the OVA does not exist in the manga, and she's a major character in the OVA and she's a major character in this film. So that's another example. But it is incredibly faithful. It is beautiful. Everyone's going to talk about how beautiful the film is. It's going to get a lot of recognition for its visuals. It is fantastic looking. The uncanny valley goes away very quickly. At the first 30 seconds, it was jarring, and then you just get really used to it. And the other CGI characters, or partially CGI characters, like those ones with perfectly human faces and completely synthetic bodies, are incredibly realistic. At no point did I ever suspect that they felt that they were in the scene, and that's really incredible. I cannot stress how amazing it looks. It is not as dystopian as the manga and OVA. It's a bit more colorful, a bit more clean. So it's one of those situations where in the manga, everyone wants to go to Zalem, or depending, Tagaris or something, regardless what the name is. But it's a title that... what's going on with this? But it's one of those things where the feature film is a bit cleaner, a bit brighter, so it doesn't seem like people have a hard life down there, but it doesn't seem as hard as the manga and the OVA depict. So it's great because it encompasses everything. Like, once again, these scenes right here are directly from the OVA. We see them in the film as well, almost to the angle as well. And that's something I believe that's entirely Rodriguez. I think we owe the credit of this film's success just from the fan response to two people, and that's James Cameron's script and Robert Rodriguez directing. Rodriguez being humble enough to carry the original vision through, which is something he's well known, and then James Cameron, who's a good storyteller who knows how to do a faithful adaptation, and that's really what we're seeing here. So much so, and this is where I couldn't attach my critical analysis. People made complaints of the pacing, of character development, and I, of course, can't see anything other than the original OVA, being in love with it, and seeing it translated perfectly here. So yeah, I was amazed at how faithful the story was to everything involved. However, there are a few changes that they do go into, and some of them are for the better, and that's part that's crazy. Some of the changes they made actually made the film better than the OVA is based on. One of which is the origin of Alita. They explore that path into a lot more detail here. They bring up her past, which the OVA does not do. They never reveal her past at all. The inclusions of Motorball, which is a cool thing, which is not in the OVA, but is in the original manga. But there's a few other things. Her connection with Ito, Daisen Ito, or Daisaku Ito in the OVA. In the OVA and the manga, it's a little muddled to the nature of their relationship. What it means is that it kind of plays less parental and more ownership, where he feels he's created this work of art with Alita and feels he has to possess her and control her. And it makes that relationship rather strained, and it never really 100% resolves this in the OVA. In the film, I could go back to the OVA. In the OVA, Alita, or Gundam, depending on which version you watch, is named after Daisaku Ito's cat, where in the feature film, she's named after his dead daughter, and that's a huge shift. Because at that point, it establishes that parental, and it reinforces that parental angle in a way that the OVA didn't do and should have done. It makes that dynamic, that relationship, so much better. It creates so much more intimacy between these two characters rather than just he created something and wants to control it and doesn't look at her as a person for a good chunk of the story. And I much prefer this one. This is a much better, it's a much more personal angle. It makes the character more relatable with Ito. That's an important thing. And it also establishes the relationship between Ito and Chiron, which is only hinted at and not referenced in the OVA, but is much more defined. Like they have more scenes together. We know the history of their relationship. It makes a lot more sense. It makes her a much more fleshed out character. So Chiron is better as well. And this is where the controversy can come into play. I find Hugo's character a lot better in the film. The actor is the weakest part, and it's hard to say he's the weakest link when he's surrounded. Like, you have Rosa Salazar in mocap, and she's fantastic. Then you have the actor playing Hugo, and then you have 3 Oscar winners. I mean, you're going to be overshadowed. There's just no way around that. I mean, you're up against 3 Oscar winners. It's just one of them is a duel. I think the other one just Machina Ali won a second Oscar. I think he has won a second Oscar. Maybe you have to check. I think he's on a second Oscar. So you've got 5 Oscars between 3 actors. I mean, and then this guy comes up, and how is he going to measure up? So, but I think more so is the character of Hugo in the original anime was not likable, to the point where you were really unsure why Alita adored him so much, other than the idea that she was basically becoming she developed this relationship because he was the first guy she ever saw, and she immediately became attached to him. And yeah, that is kind of faithful, because she's kind of confused. She's experiencing all these emotions for the first time. And in the movie, it happens the same way, except Hugo is not an ass. So it makes a bit more sense that she would sustain those feelings after her maturity started to come into its own. The issue, and this is where it's a balance, is that Hugo is a more developed character in the OVA. And that's something the film decided not to do, which I'll do in my critical analysis when I talk about some of the things the film might have done incorrectly. Battles are fantastic. The 3D is astounding. There's only maybe 2 or 3 moments where the 3D comes at you. This is something that James Cameron brought to the forefront with Avatar. Everything in Avatar was depth, going into the screen rather than coming out. And he had remarked there's only 3 scenes in Avatar where something comes out of the camera towards you. So when it happens, it's actually quite shocking. And same thing happens with this film. There's only a couple moments, and almost all of them deal with Chewbacca's. I'm going to mangle these names. The Chewbacca's finger extensions, and they came out of the screen effectively in the OVA, and they come out of the screen in a very dramatic way in the film as well. And it's just absolutely fantastic, to the point where I actually jumped in my seat. I think the first time it happened, it was very, very good. So yeah, faithful, well written. Well-defined characters, and they took better choices regarding the characters. I felt that the relationships were well-defined, the character arcs were better defined, and I know somebody like Jeremy Johns complained that Alita wins every fight. In the OVA, she also wins every fight, but at least in the OVA, she also doesn't seem to be hurt with every fight. Where in the film, you can see that she's strong, but she's also vulnerable. She's not perfect, and she may win a fight, but she will come out of it damaged. So I definitely enjoyed that they did bring down her indestructibility. They've also, going back to what I said about Hugo, though, like they made his character a bit more relatable, a bit more positive, but they did result in removing some of the more darker elements of his personality, which we'll go into in the critical analysis. But the story is so faithful, there were certain elements I was surprised came up. Like every single scene we've seen so far in this OVA, and this is where we're getting into spoilers, everything you're seeing, everything you've seen so far is in the film. The rocket hammer, deploying the rocket hammer, the shape of his suitcase that would roll around and it's kind of waist high, the fight between like the serial killers that were killing women in the beginning of the story. And this is not a huge spoiler because it's the first 10 minutes of over 2-hour film. And it's shocking how much they put in there. Ito does act in this way, and the animation is fantastic. The plot lines are in there. They brought, there's nothing they took out of the OVA. The entire OVA is present, and they've added more with the motorball. They've combined certain characters, and once again, to the advantage, certain characters were combined. Like Chewbacca, the guy who's in this scene right here, fighting Alita, he pops up. Now, in the OVA, he pops up twice. In the film, he pops up 3 times. Because at the end of the OVA, there's a final boss battle with a generic boss, and it just made more sense to bring that guy back. It just made more sense. So, like I said, everything that they've changed, I felt they've actually done better, and this is a really rare thing to find. I know some people will complain. They even brought in potentially one of the primary antagonists for the sequel in a cameo. That's got a bit of a mixed response. I have no problem with it. So, yeah. Absolutely fantastic film. I love it dearly. I think it's grand. I can't wait to see it again. It's still fresh in my memory, and I've been seeing a lot of stuff. I rewatched the OVA, and I definitely can say that I'm really hoping, and I'm glad it's doing so well overseas that maybe we'll see a sequel. I know that everyone involved is up for it, and I think it's something. I think it'll do well. Which brings up some of the critical analysis, and some of it, I'll tell you that the negative criticism is so petty, even I would probably dislike my video. But it's petty because it's such a minor quibble because of how amazing the rest of the film is. But I have to throw up the spoilers, warnings for those people who haven't seen it, who are curious. If you've seen the OVA, then you know what this film's going to have. So it's not a spoiler for you. So you've seen the OVA and don't want to be spoiled. Well, I'm sorry, you've been spoiled because it's such a faithful adaptation that you already know is going to happen. The first thing regards, I guess the arc is exactly the same. The films begin and end at the exact same point as the OVA, but the OVA is 55 minutes. And the film is over 2 hours, so they definitely let room to breathe, which is wonderful because animes usually run so fast that their pacing runs off the clock. And that's why people said this film was oddly paced. I didn't see that because about an hour and a half into it, I'm like, oh, the film's an hour left. Can it go on for another 3 hours? I mean, are there really amazing films or ones like, I really can't let this film end? I mean, I was watching Aquaman, which is another film people have criticized that I loved, and I was like, you know, this one can keep on going for another 3 hours. I can hold it. And that's what I felt watching Alita. I at no point did I feel that I wanted to get up and leave. I just wanted to keep going. But like I said, going back to that level of faithfulness, I was really happy with, once again, everything we're seeing here. We're seeing even that robot with the little face and the puffy mouth. It's kind of in here as well. They made it look not dumb, but it's in there. Even that little little head pops up and it talks, and it's a cool. I remember watching that in the film and then watching the OVA again. Like I went, oh my god, they got that scene in there as well. But there are a few things that you'll look at, like when she befriends the dog. She befriends this beautiful little cute little dog. In the OVA, it's a much larger dog, but in the movie, it's a cute little dog. And my fiance is an animal person, so I remembered watching that, the inclusion of the dog, going, oh, this is not going to go well. I wanted to lean over and go, I am so sorry about the dog. It's like a half an hour before it happens. You're like, oh, this is not going to go well. And yeah, that scene carries out exactly the way. Thankfully, the OVA is unrated. The film is rated PG-13, so they don't show you. In the OVA, they do. So I'm like, part of me was like, oh, there's no way they'll get away with this in a PG-13. And likely they didn't show it, but you still... So... In the promotional materials, you see her smearing blood under her eyes, and I knew, like, wait a second, that's the dog. And when I saw the dog, I'm like, oh my god, it is the dog. So I knew that scene was going to happen. That was really fantastic. And like I said, the Chiro relationship with Ito is much more established. This is their daughter that died, which was something that was never established in the OVA, which is so much better than what the OVA did. I think it, absolutely. The inclusion of Motorball wasn't jarring. I felt it worked really, really well. I felt the characterizations were good. I think Vector, he got more developed because his OVA character had no context whatsoever. There was nothing to his character. And here they didn't make him more menacing, but they developed him by including the plot point that he had someone to answer to, which was this overlying boss with Nova, who's not mentioned in the OVA, that we see in a cameo. They could have referenced him. They could have had his voice. I don't think we needed to see him. I think that felt more sequel baity than normal. Now, on the point of sequel, people talk about this film as sequel baiting. It's baiting a sequel. Why is that a bad thing? When did that become a bad thing? People don't look at Fellowship of the Ring and go, oh, they're just baiting for a sequel. People didn't watch Harry Potter and go, oh, they're just baiting for a sequel. That is quite literally how it worked. So I've never understood. I think the reason why people talk about sequel baiting is that if the first film doesn't have a through plot, it doesn't have an arc, it doesn't have an actual A to B to C storyline. See, there's the dog. If it seems to go and then end with a cliffhanger, and it's just one film, and it's not based on a property that's been established, yeah, I can see that. But even Fellowship of the Ring, there's an arc. The people go through an arc. There is a storyline. There's a climax, even though they don't make it to Mordor in the first one. Harry Potter doesn't kill Voldemort in the first book, but there's still an arc. And I think that's sequel baiting. And Alita doesn't sequel bait because it has an absolute arc. It has a beautiful arc. So it's not sequel baiting. I don't understand this. Just because a film is prepping itself for a potential franchise is not a sin, unless you are sacrificing the quality of the first film to ensure the second film, which some Marvel films have been accused of doing. You're not going to see it in Alita. So yeah, that's my rant about sequel baiting. This film does prep its sequel, but I wish they pushed it more out, maybe even as a post-credit scene rather than part of the main storyline. I said that they included Hugo's character a bit more, but one critique is that he's not fleshed out as much. I mean, he wants to go to Zellum. He says, I want to go to Zellum. That's my obsession. Everyone wants to go to Zellum. Costs 1 million credits to go to Zellum, and I'm going to do it. And I'm going to do it any way possible. In the OVA and in the manga, they go into deep history as to why that obsession is there, regarding his brother, his sister-in-law, their betrayal, their death, or his death, the brother's death, Hugo potentially having attempted suicide, and then developing that incredible obsession because of that. So much so that he overlooks the feelings from this character of Ganem/Alita. He refutes her and ignores her, pushes her away because of this obsession. And because they took that history out, they very more likely to rechange his character, so he doesn't seem like a complete piece of shit for the entire movie. So as a result, they end up being closer. Their relationship does organically come together. Some people say he's just romantic love interest number one. He's very, very thin, and that's where I think they could have added in by making him, bringing in those subplots. And now, knowing Rodriguez and really knowing James Cameron, because James Cameron, when he directs a film, shoots like an extra 30 minutes. Like, he makes 3-hour films and then cuts them together. So it makes me wonder if that scene exists, that we do have sequences of Hugo's past that just hit the cutting room floor. The same thing with some sequences with Ito, which I think are lacking. I think that easily could have been shot, and we may see them in a director's extended cut. So that stuff with Hugo could have hit the cutting room floor. But there's some elements as well, like in the OVA, in the movie, Hugo basically is part of this group of bandits that are attacking cybernetically enhanced people and stealing their cybernetic parts, but leaving them alive. In the OVA, he doesn't. He's quite literally a murderer. At least that's the impression I always got, is that he was a murderer. Like, sorry guys, sorry about that scene. I know that they do show it, so if you don't want to see it, don't look away, look away. Oh, it's so disgusting. But in the film, in the film, I kept on waiting for the reveal of him being this really bad guy, and he's a bad guy, but it's so much so that later in the film, one of the other bounty hunters ends up killing somebody to pin it on Hugo, to get the bounty on Hugo, which is interesting because in the OVA, he didn't need to do that. Hugo already was going to get. We just needed to find out. The authorities just needed to know who he was to put the bounty on him. And once the bounty came up, he was a wanted man because he was killing people, which makes that relationship with Alita even more. It makes her emotions even more conflicted. But he didn't. But so as a result, somebody else, another side character, a villain, ends up having to murder somebody to pin it on Hugo to get the whole ball rolling. So that was a mechanical device in the plot. And I know they did that so Alita would feel betrayed but not mortified. And you would think, wait a second, this guy's a murderer. Why are you still with him? By making him not a murderer, it makes her connection to him a bit easier to swallow. So I can understand why they did that. The other thing, of course, is that I knew where this obsession would go. So I know my fiance is going, loving the relationship, and me realizing if this story is faithful, this is going to end, unfortunately, very poorly. By the way, this battle we're seeing here, this character is, once again, we see this guy, this fight's in the movie. It happens a little differently. He basically attacks her in a bar in Kansas. The bar is called Kansas, and goes her into attacking him, and then so she jumps to fight him. In this OVA, she defeats him. She actually defeats him But in the movie, she kind of cripples him and ends the fight, and he comes back at the end of the film, which is good, absolutely. Because it allows her to have a final fight with this guy and taking him out once and for all. The film also introduces this wonderful futuristic monomolecular blade that she flaunts. That's not in the OVA. That's definitely a plot point that's included in there. And they go into detail of her past. Now, in the film, she actually has two cybernetic bodies. She has a starting one that Ito makes for her, and then later a much more advanced berserker suit. This is directly from the manga. You do not see it in the OVA. However, there's a strange thing. She kind of finds it, like she gets taken to one of these crashed Mars wrecks, which has been on the planet for apparently centuries. She goes in, manages to get inside, where apparently no one else has been able to get inside for potentially 3 centuries, which is hard to believe, and then finds one suit perfectly custom to her. And there's openings for all the other suits that are empty, and just the one left is one perfectly fitted for her. Now, in the OVA, Ito just had a berserker suit hiding. So, yeah, that's not as good a plot point. But I was like, it's a weird coincidence that she finds a ship, and in that ship happens to have one suit remaining that happens to fit her perfectly. Feels kind of hard to believe. I mean, for me, I would say, yeah, it makes sense that she would be able to get in there because she was able to access part of the doorway that no one else was able to find. But then I would maybe have 5-6 suits of different classifications of different body shapes, and then her finding the one for her. I mean, that seems to be a foregone solution to that, so I don't know why they did it that way. It seemed like a really weird coincidence. So then she gets that body made into her, and then in a very humorous scene, her body adapts, which means she physically quite literally grows up in a span of just 30 seconds, because she had this, I imagine, 13-year-old body, which is the body that was made by Ito for his daughter before she died. And then she gets a body of somebody who's probably in their late teens, if not early 20s. Which means like she quite literally, I think, gets taller, and then a few other things happen. Which it's interesting. There's a line that the Ito's assistant says where she goes, she looks at the body as it's actually shaping itself to her desired body shape, and the doctor's assistant says, "I think she's older than you thought she was." And I knew exactly what that meant, but my fiance was referring to the fact that she was probably 300 years old. And I'm like, no, I think it's referencing the fact that her breasts got larger. It's a very strange thing to have that line in there, but I thought it was quite humorous, and I got a kick out of it. The other critical thing about this, which I'll go into, is regarding the ending, specifically the conflict between Vector and the climax of the story. In the OVA, Vector is confronted by Ito alone. Ito's alone. He goes to confront Vector. Vector reveals what happened to Chiron, which is exactly the same way as what happens in the OVA. And obviously, Ito kind of loses his temper. A generic big cyborg comes out, which is Chuish. I get that name, Chuishka. In the film and in the OVA, he takes the guy's arm out. The arm flies off and kills Vector as collateral, and that's how it is. In the film, Alita confronts Vector alone, fights Chuiga, kills him, and then kills Vector, and then that's the climax of that story, but not the climax of her arc, which occurs later. And that always bothered me because I always felt that should have been Ito's climax, because she already has her climax. Now, and the weird thing, of course, is that because they developed the relationship between Chiron and Ito more, it makes that ending even more important for Ito, for him to be there. And people will say, well, no, it's Alita's film. It should always be Alita's film. And you have a point, and this is where the compromise comes into play, because in the manga, it's both of them that go. And that's the important thing, because they made the conscious decision, and if they were trying to honor the manga, it should have been both of them that went to that final confrontation, right? Ito gets to get that closure moment with Chiron realizing that she's been killed, and then him kind of going crazy, being disabled, and then Alita finally doing the deed. But obviously they made the conscious decision that Ito's presence would be distraction. It would not seem like Alita's story, so they took him off. And you don't need Ito back at the hospital to inform Alita of Hugo's escape. You have an assistant that can do that. So I understand why they did it. There's a part of me that feels he was a supporting character, by his definition supporting, but he has a through line story arc that seems to just get truncated in the last half hour, and he just becomes a servicing tool. He doesn't seem to have much plot, even to the point where he kind of drops off for the rest of the film. And that includes something else that happens as we get into the final story arc regarding Hugo. This happens exactly the same way as the OVA, exactly the same way. He gets mortally injured, his head gets severed by design so that Alita can keep him alive. He gets attached to a fully cybernetic body. In the OVA, he is mortified about this process, and it becomes even more compelled to go to Zalem at any cost. And he has a bounty on his head. In the film, he has a bounty on his head. He doesn't seem to be as mortified. You don't see him reacting to the fact that he's got a fully cybernetic body, and not one as pretty as Alita. It's very clumsy, very clumsy design. Alita goes out to stop him, trying to convince him to come back and have a life with her. Both the OVA and the anime and the film, there's a moment where you believe that he is acquiescing and is conceding and giving up on Zalem. But then moments later, a defense ring comes down and takes him out. The defense ring inclusion is a very minor plot point, too, because in the OVA, the defense rings come down all the time. They come down apparently every minute or so to clear off any vermin or people trying to climb up it. But it doesn't. I've always thought that would make sense. Like, how do you get the rings back up? Do they take them off and then ship them back up? Because if they're coming down every minute, you're shipping up hundreds of these a day. So it always bothered me, like, how do these things work? And the film actually was very intelligent in the way that these things are sent actively or proactively by Zalem on command if they detect someone on an umbilical, and no other times. As a result, you don't see two rings go down. You only see one ring go down. In the OVA, two rings go down. One takes off Hugo's legs, and the second ring kind of finishes the job. In this one, that first ring doesn't really happen. He just gets taken out. But you still have that same kind of climax, even with him hanging, the arm snapping off, and him vanishing into the fog. Literally scene for scene from the OVA, which is just really impressive. However, in the OVA, there's a final scene where Ito and Alita put his arm, which is the only thing they have of him, into a basket with Chiron's necklace, which is another iconic image from her character in the OVA, into a small hot air balloon, and then lifting it up and letting it rise up to Zalem symbolically. And that scene's not in here, and I felt that I would have liked that. And once again, this scene could have been shot. Now, the transition doesn't seem like it was. There's a beautiful sped up transition from the sequence with Alita on the umbilical until her entering the tournament. But that still could have been brought in post as a way of transitioning that scene, and it could very well, that scene of the balloon might actually still be in there. But its absence, I noted. It was interesting. So yeah, these are very minor quibbles, so minor, like the fact that Ito doesn't feature in the last act where it seemed like he should. That closure between him and Chiron. Not developing Hugo's character like the OVA, but still maintaining the original plot point of his obsession. I think those inclusions would have been good. I mean, it would have added maybe 2 minutes onto a film that was already pushing 2.5 hours. I mean, come on. What's another 2 minutes? So maybe those scenes exist. And we will see them in a director's cut version. But we probably won't see a scene where Ito and Alita go to the final climax together. That seems to be something that was written right from the get-go to just include Alita. But the film is, as you might have noticed, incredibly faithful. They've also compressed certain characters. In the OVA, you have a bunch of really nice-looking hunter warriors, but in the film, they kind of compress most of them into just being one or two people, which I have no problem with. So yeah, it's an incredibly faithful story. It's really, really solid. I think it is going to develop more of a fan following. I think it's gonna pull a profit eventually. Which brings up my last point, which has been their response afterwards. Now, there has been a massive fan response, 95% in Rotten Tomatoes, with people talking about how amazing this film is. The anime fans are all behind this. I've not seen a single anime fan walk out of this and going, that's not my Alita. I was like, everyone walks out of this and goes, wow, we could not have asked for a better one. This is what we've been going for. We've been lifting up these steps with Ghost in the Shell, and now And now we want this film to be successful because it may pave the way for more faithful adaptations. That if they do finally do the Akira remake, it won't be a bastardization of the original manga. That maybe they will tackle other animes. I almost wish that this film came out first so that Ghost in the Shell didn't need to compromise so much in order to make it. Because that's the thing about this film. But let's talk about Pacific fan reactions. There's a couple reactions that have been bothering me, a couple of them that haven't. The first is the absence of criticism about whitewashing. Now, I complained about the whitewashing in Ghost in the Shell, but I was defending it, saying they wrote a justification in the story. It is a justification. It is a compromise the writers made to try to appease the plot. It was an entirely made up compromise that some people said made it worse. I don't agree. I think it was the writers trying to find a way to make that system work. But in that same case, I mean, I defend it, and I say I like the film, but I need to stress that if I was writing that, I never would have done that. If I was a producer, I never would have cast Scarlett Johansson in that role. I would have done something very different, but that's not part of this discussion. Specifically, going to Alita. Now, the reason why I felt Ghost in the Shell didn't have as much problems with whitewashing was because of its setting specific, ignoring where the manga was written. I'm talking about where it was set. And I was surprised that Alita never got attacked. Never once did I see another whitewashing Japanese anime. That might exist, but it never got to the light of day. And I never saw any complaints about it. And the reason is, of course, is that the same issue that people had, they're not understanding the setting. Alita is technically set in Kansas. You know, the makers of the film shifted it to Panama City. So they literally made it more multi-ethnic than what the anime was perceiving. Yes, the characters have generally Japanese names, but that's just part of the course. Every Japanese anime have Japanese names, even if they're not set in Japan or have Japanese characters. I mean, titles like Attack on Titan have Japanese characters, and it's not set in Japan. It's got a very European-styled aesthetic, and yet, you know, you have that, but that's just part of how they have their naming rights. I mean, the same thing happens with a lot of American westernized novelizations that aren't set in America. They'll still make up westernized names for their characters, and that's just kind of part of the course. So yeah, Alita is actually set in America, and they made it more multi-ethnic and more colorful, which I have no problem with. But there was never any accusations about Ito being cast by a white Austrian actor, or Chiron being a white. There was never an inclusion of why isn't this. Like, I don't see any Asian actors in this film, but there was no blowback. Of course, the reason is that the anime, even though it's Japanese, does not have Japanese characters. So I was surprised I didn't see that reaction. And I think if that reaction did come up, I think the anime fans would come up and defend it and go, "This is not the sword you want to fall on." There is definitely a problem with whitewashing. I need to stress that. Gods of Egypt is a perfect example. And yeah, I definitely would not have cast Scarlett Johansson. I wouldn't have written the excuse to have her in the story. I just would have cast it. Because at the end of the day, her name is Motoko Kusanagi. She's quite literally named after a Japanese sword. So why don't you just cast a Japanese actress in that role? I had no problem with the rest of the ethnic casting of that, or the ethnic/racial casting of Ghost in the Shell. It had a multi-ethnic cast. I had no problem. I had no problem with a Chinese actor playing a Japanese Tokusa. I had no problem with that. I like the fact that Ishikawa got turned into, I think South African. I think it was a South African actor. I had no problem with that. What I would have done with Ghost in the Shell, I would have made Bateau a big name Hollywood actor, brought his role up, because if you watch the anime, it's a very much a Tokusa Motoko Bateau story and not just Motoko Central. Here I am talking about Ghost in the Shell again. But anyway, we don't see that with Alita. And I thought it was really surprising that I didn't see that kind of negative reaction. So that was more an observation. But the cast is, I mean, it is at multi-ethnic. I mean, Rosie Salazar is not what, it's not a white Anglo-Saxon actress. So yeah, I mean, it's there, but I was really surprised we didn't see that. But that comes up something else which is bothering me. When I have several YouTube channels with different addresses and so forth. One of them is Gateway Gamers, which I've been reposting all the old Gateway Gamers off of Deus Ex Machina on that site. And I started watching some of the pro Alita reviews off of that channel. And it's a new channel. But that also means, unfortunately, that my entire recommended feed is now filled with really negative and or hateful videos that seem to be pushing a very specific narrative. That narrative is Alita is awesome, Captain Marvel is not. Alita is the feminine hero we want, Captain Marvel is toxic feminism. This is permeating this side of the conversation, and it's bothering me. I am not, by the way, on the side. I don't like terms like triggered or SJW. I think people have a right to be bothered. They have the right to be upset. They have a right to find certain language and terminology and decisions offensive. I think that is entirely their right. I think it is oppressive to label people who complain as snowflakes. I don't like the term. I think all of these are developed by very shallow white males predominantly, and they're pushing, as you might have noticed, I am as white as they come. I am Portuguese pure blood. I'm a Canadian. I was born in Canada, and I don't have any ethnic mix beyond that. I mean, right all the way back to Vasco da Gama. That's how Portuguese I am. And I can say that there's an issue right now with toxic masculinity that is dominating the last few years, and it's because for decades, if not centuries, white men got to control the narrative, and now that we are offering alternative narrative viewpoints, suddenly they're having issues, and they're creating this belief that a lot of people are following through, that it's unhealthy, that it's reverse racism, which I think doesn't exist. I don't believe it. I don't believe a white person can be racist to another white person. That's a side point entirely. The Rotten Tomatoes thing about them deactivating permanently the hype meter of people wanting to see it, as some type of conspiracy between Rotten Tomatoes and Disney. No, I don't think that at all. I think this was the third strike in a ramping escalation of trolling by this toxic masculinity. Specifically, it started probably with Last Jedi, which, by the way, I like. And then it hit ahead with Black Panther, which I also love. But now we're doing it with Captain Marvel, and I think Rotten Tomatoes has said, okay, no, enough's enough. I personally would have preferred them to have killed this back with Last Jedi, and they should have done it with Black Panther. They're doing it with Captain Marvel. Better late than never. But I don't think it's Disney making a call to Rotten Tomatoes telling them to suppress it. Brie Larson is entitled to her opinion. I don't believe in any way she's controlling the narrative of Captain Marvel's film. I think they made a really good film that she enjoys being part of, and almost everything I've seen from her camp, I actually don't disagree with. I think there are too many white males dominating the industry anyway. We should include, because white males hire white males. It just happens. Hell, I'm writing a script right now, and I just by automatic, when I was doing the casting for the script I was writing, I was populating it with white actors. And I looked at it and said, wow, I did it as a knee-jerk reaction, and that's an issue. And I wanted to go back and go, my story quite literally is defined by multiculturalism, so I literally can't avoid that. I need to make sure. And so I had to go back and look at it and going, okay, who can play these people? And it forced me to put things into perspective and go, sometimes we don't realize that we do it, and it's a problem. So yeah, there is too much. There's too much of a single narrative being pushed by this one group of people, white males, specifically westernized white males. We don't see this that often in the more socialist countries in Europe, countries that I very much admire. But a lot of the times, a lot of these very modern progressive countries are also predominantly white. And I sometimes credit America being this culture pot, and Canada as well. But Canada's has that problem as well. Whenever someone looks at Canada and looks at the issues that plague America, Canada's suffering from the same one. It doesn't seem like it's there, but it's there. So I think this issue does exist. I think we should be pushing for more diversity in almost every walk of life, in every element, especially in cinema. So yeah, I think they have a point. And I'm looking forward to seeing Captain Marvel. And my final takeaway on this was, can't we have both? right? The rhetoric that's being pushed by the Alita lovers is that Alita is a strong female character that is strong despite being frail. I mean, like I said, she gets torn apart in one part of the movie, and she still takes out the bad guy despite being an arm and a torso. And she's somewhat saved emotionally and physically by men, but she also saves their lives more times than that. And that's kind of the complexity of her character. But that's Alita. Alita was a subversive title in the genre that was meant to go against the hot girl trope of always being rescued, a trope that's still alive today. So it seems like I felt like a lot of the anime writers and directors in Japan didn't get the note and didn't get what Alita was trying to say. And the funny thing is that Alita still is sexualized in a lot of circles. So that was kind of their point. This is a strong character that is strong along with strong male characters, where Captain Marvel's belief is the fact that she has to be stronger by belittling the men around her. First of all, we have seen 2 trailers. We've seen nothing to point to that. And even if, and I don't believe for a second that they're decreasing Sam Jackson's character's ego to make him submissive and I'm like, you know what? No, I'm not getting that at all. I'm getting scenes that are funny. I see scenes where they're interacting as equals. I don't have a problem with it. I mean, she is the main character. This story should revolve around her. She should be the strongest character because she's Captain Marvel. She quite literally is the strongest character, one of the strongest characters in the entire. She's got to be, for the longest time, probably one of the strongest characters, right up there with Thor. I mean, look what she can do. She is the Superman of that universe now, and will be until they start developing some of the other characters. And I don't have a problem with this. I don't have a problem that the single most powerful character in the MCU is a woman. And I don't think that is somehow competing with Alita. I think they're very different stories. I mean, they are, obviously. I mean, one's a superhero story that's one chapter of this greater story arc, and one is a dystopian, futuristic cyberpunk story about a robotic girl. And that's where I think the distinction, and that's where I look back at Ghost in the Shell and went, yeah, they could have done better. They could have made her a stronger character, but I felt that just the writing and the performance didn't really convey that. I really think that was a failure on that part now looking back, because I look at Alita and go, oh yeah, that's how you do it. Yeah, that's a much better way of doing it. But that doesn't diminish Captain Marvel. And I'm really bothered now by this belief that if you're a lover of Alita, you have to crap on Captain Marvel. That these things are exclusive. You cannot like them both. You have to go to war with one in order to love the other. And if you don't believe this, trust me, you know, like we had this controversy that if you start a new account and you watch a couple videos, your feed will be dominated until you start watching other videos with other recommended titles. And now my feed is filled with this competition between Alita and Marvel. And people need to bring up their game because Alita's not doing very locally, it's doing very well internationally, but that Captain Marvel in a couple of days is expected to destroy Alita and everything else to be. But I think that we'll probably see a 500 million, hopefully 500 million global for Alita, enough to justify potentially a sequel. I think it'll develop as much of a fan following that if we get to a sequel, that everyone will show up with hope. But no, I know that a lot of people that have been watching these videos have been seeing this competition, this comparison to bring down Captain Marvel for various reasons in order to bring up Alita. And so when you're watching this video, it may seem jarring, especially if you've gone through this length of this long rant, believing that, okay, well, this guy's not following the same narrative as everyone else. And that's true. Yes, I absolutely love Alita. I think it's fantastic. It is faithful. If you love anime, you should see it. If you love Alita, you should probably have seen it already. If you haven't, like, what are you waiting for? But more so than that, Alita is fantastic on its own. It doesn't need to be compared to Captain Marvel or any other film to justify your love of it. You don't need to hate Captain Marvel for that. Captain Marvel may suck. I'm not saying that. It is the end of February. It's still got a full 7 days, probably 8-9 days before I see it. And I'm telling you right now that I'm not going into it with a chip on my shoulder, and I don't plan on doing that because I want to give all films a fair break. Oddly enough, the only film that comes down in effect, Alita, was, like I said, Ghost in the Shell, a film I loved, and now kind of, it's really good. But now I can see with Alita what they could have done, because that is a comparison worth making, because they're both animes from the early 90s that have been adapted to feature films. Now, we're getting to the end of the movie here, and we can see that this is incredibly faithful. This is an experience that does happen. And it just shows you the character arc, the way it worked. I liked the film. I'll give it a 9 out of 10, maybe a 10 out of 10 if I watch it again. Maybe if I watch it again, the plot pacing issues that people keep on complaining about will emerge. I just don't think I'll see it. We watched the film, my fiance and I, she loved it. She had no experience with Alita. She had no idea what it was. She wanted to see it a second time immediately. I wanted to see it a second time immediately. And we may actually see, we seldom see films twice. As it is, we want to see Dragons, and we'll be seeing Captain Marvel. But there's part of us both that want to see this film again, because it really is fantastic. It's visually beautiful. One of the best 3Ds out there. So that's my review on my summary on Battle Angel Alita. I've been talking way too long, and I'm amazed any of you guys have caught up. If you've gotten to the criticism, I appreciate it. If you've gotten to my review of the fan response, you're entitled to your opinion. If you believe in some of these things, I'll disagree. I'll disagree wholeheartedly. I don't believe there's a conspiracy against Alita. I don't believe that there's collusion between Rotten Tomatoes and Disney. I don't believe there's suppression. I don't believe in this type of narrative. I do believe there is toxic masculinity. I do believe that there is not a conspiracy, but a group of people, almost a standalone complex, if you know Ghost in the Shell, a standalone complex of individuals all doing these together, but individual on their own, to create this narrative that says there's some kind of grand conspiracy against them and trying to suppress the rights of white males. I don't believe that. I think, trust me, as a white male, I think I'm doing just fine. I don't see it. And so with that, I will leave you guys to it. This is an unusual video, and I may end cutting it down a little bit, but I think it's going to go up more or less unedited as it is. Great movie. Go see it.